Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello, welcome back to this continued discussion on Kamala Das. No wonder, having heard some of her lines, having heard about her, no wonder if you feel that, you are in the presence of some live fire. It's true that, there is a kind of a burning, if you hold her poetry, you get burnt in that, of course, burnt in a positive sense. Earlier too, we had used this metaphor. Please recall, poetry has the capacity to burn us and fashion us afresh. So, in that sense, we can call every reader of poetry, every reader of literature is a Dvija. Of course, Indian philosophical traditions are in caste system. Dvija has a different connotation. Dvija is a twice born. When somebody wears the sacred thread, it is said they become, they are born again. Well, that's a metaphoric meaning. Well, poetry too has the capacity to, make us, to burn us, to burn our older self and create us afresh. Therefore, even poetry makes us Dvijas, the twice born. So, every reader of poetry is twice born in that sense. We were discussing in the last class how Kamala Das poetry can be called, confessional poetry, and how, of course, keeping, looking at the spirit of confession, she almost practiced it to perfection. Therefore, you can't find a better confessional poet or more, honest and confessional, poet than Kamala Das. We were discussing all that. Let's continue our discussion of her poetry. Okay. It was true that, the time in which she wrote or that period in which she lived, she always felt, trapped in that, because she was always ahead of her time, or unfortunately, the society in which she lived failed to keep up with her pace. That's why she always felt, a bit trapped in a kind of a society that she felt was, it did not do justice to her. That's how she felt, and of course, she has every reason to feel that way. In the highest sense of the term, she was a true seeker. She was a seeker of freedom, and poetry for her was a means to achieve that freedom. That's why, of course, words gave her a new set of wings. What she couldn't achieve in life, she achieved it through her imagination, through her writing. So, therefore, you can say that it was poetry that helped her, that really helped her to come out of the shackles of society and liberated her. She felt truly liberated in the imaginative spaces of poetry and literature. We discussed this, that as a major confession. Of course, it's not that she branded herself as a confession poet, but we consider her as a confession poet because, of course, she chose poetry as a medium to convey her deepest secrets or wildest thoughts and even, suppressed desires. That's the reason why we said that poetry for her was more a liberating force, and she chose to pour her heart out. Words absorbed what society could not take. Words absorbed. Words gave her, good companionship. That's the reason why she emerged as the greatest poet, because because of her extraordinary poetic sensibility. and attachment to confessional mode. She is generally compared with poets such as Sylvia Plath, and of course her poetic genius is no less than that of Sylvia Plath, or probably a little more than what Sylvia Plath did. She is much greater than Sylvia Plath, of course. Having heard about her life, having heard about her views on poetry, and having heard some snippets of her poems here and there, now let's come face to face with one of her most well-known poems. Again, you can see the autobiographical elements in this poem and confessional mode of poetry that she practiced in that poem. So, this poem epitomizes her both preoccupations, the autobiographical preoccupation and how poetry becomes a mode through which you write your story, you write your story, and how poetry offers you a space, to share your deepest desires, darkest thoughts and things like that. Of course, it is a slightly longish poem. So, we have again taken a few excerpts, we have left out a few stanzas, retained some, and if she interests you, you should seek out her poetry and read rest of her poetry as well, including this poem. I don't know politics, but I don't know politics, but I know the names of those in power and can repeat them like days of weeks or names of months beginning with Nehru. Right in the very first few lines, she makes her disdain for politics explicit, right? It's not, she is well versed not with politics. She can, like a child that learns to memorize, she knows, the leaders, those in power, those leaders, she can repeat them. That does not mean she is attached to them like a child is made to memorize, nothing beyond that, nothing beyond that. So, right there her disdain for politics is quite evident. I am Indian, very brown, born in Malabar, I speak 3 languages, write in 2, dream in 1. Of course, when we read poems like this, of course, the entire this activity is to help us read a poem. Please do not, because we are discussing poetry from across the globe, please don't mistake this course as a kind of a course that gives you an historical overview. No, of course, one of the ideas behind all these classes is to give you an overview of poetry, but when we go deeper into at least a few poems, the intention is to make you familiar with how poetry works, how poetry through words weaves a different magic into the fabric of language. Poetry unfolds using the fabric of magic, but it is not just the fabric of language, but it is not just the fabric of language that is there in poetry. A great poet, a great writer weaves many other things, including slicing a part of their own life, slicing a part of their own flesh, their own soul. They weave it into the fabric of language, and thereby make language immortal as well. Okay. I speak 3 languages, write in 2, dream in 1. Don't write in English, they said. English is not your mother tongue. They stands for, it stands for critics or those who try to critique her choices, the choice of her language, what she wrote. They went on prescribing what she should write, in which language she should write, and all that. So, this is a kind of a response to all that, response to all that. So, you can go on identifying different literary elements here, and you can also go on learning or go on reading with me these poems, and in the process pick up how to read poetry in general, because most of us feel difficulty, we find poetry very difficult to understand, not because it uses extraordinary language or words that you and I don't know, but because we don't know how to read it, we don't know how to read it. So if we learn to read it properly, then probably you find poetry the easiest, you find poetry very easy to go by. And more than that, please remember, poetry, of course, only one dimension of poetry is meaning. There is another dimension. Right in the very first class, we identified poetry having two dimensions. One is the dimension of sound, the other is the dimension of sense, So you must also focus in your eagerness to search for meaning in poetry, or meaning in your eagerness to search for meaning in poems that you read. You should not lose sight of the sound, or how poetry constructs an image. So if you are used to drawing, using pencil sketches or watercolors or even oil colors, remember, poetry is just that. It's like painting the canvas with words. That's all. Painting the canvas with words. Therefore, when you create a drawing, what do you look for when you create a drawing, or when you create a painting? What do you look for in that? In fact, it pleases your eyes. It fills your entire being. It gives you an extraordinary sense of fulfillment, a rare sense of satisfaction. That's all, right? You don't look for meaning in painting, though it is quite possible to look for meaning. It's not the be all and the end all. So is poetry, right? So that's why there is a poet who says, a poem does not mean, it just be, it exists. That's all. It is not there to mean something. It just exists, So please focus on this aspect of poetry as well. Please focus on this aspect. Once when you realize that using words, a poem just creates some kind of a picture, then of course you understand, because that's when you derive a sense of fulfillment. Yeah. So as while responding to this kind of criticism, she says, why not leave me alone, critics, friends, visiting cousins, every one of you? Why not let me speak in any language I like? Why do you keep interfering in everything? Because basically, poetry is where a soul speaks with itself, or where a self speaks with its own soul. Therefore, it is the most intimate moment. So during your most intimate moments, you do not want anybody coming and giving you instructions, right? You don't like that, because it's your moment. It's your private moment. So therefore, she says, why don't you leave me? Let me be. Let me write in whatever language I like. Why do you keep advising? The language I speak becomes mine. Its distortions, its queerness, all mine, mine alone. How else do you own anything? When you use a language, it becomes yours, right? And as long as it's yours, as long as it expresses what you wish to express, why do you care in which language you write? As long as the language that you use is capable of, giving voice to your innermost feelings, your innermost, emotions, that is sufficient. You should not care what is the figure of speech involved, what is the language in which you are writing. As long as you find the language you write is capable of conveying what you wish to convey, then there ends the matter. All debates are closed. Well, if somebody criticizes that her English is not really English, it's half English, it's Indian English, well, of course, so how does it matter? It's half English, half Indian, funny perhaps, but it's honest. It's as human as I am human. Don't you see that? Right? Like you don't find a perfect human being, you don't find a perfect language for poetry. We have to do with whatever we have got, right? Therefore, if it's half English, so be it. How does it matter? Because it's capable of conveying what I wish to convey. It voices my joys, my longings, my hopes, and it is useful to me as cawing is to crows or roaring to the lions. Look how natural. See, speaking in English for me is it comes as natural to me as cawing is to crow and roaring to the lions. You may not like the voice of a crow, but just because you don't like a crow does not change the way it caws, right? That's its voice. Whether you like it or not is immaterial to that. So is it with me, I do not care whether you approve of my writing in English, my writing in Malayalam, my writing in any other language. As long as it's mine, therefore I write in it. If you like, you read it. If you don't like it, you don't need to, read it. As simple as that. It is human speech, the speech of the mind that is here and not here, a mind that sees and hears and is aware. Anywhere and everywhere I see the one who calls himself I in this world. He is tightly packed like the sword in its sheath. It is I who drink lonely drinks at 12 midnight in hotels of strange towns. It is I who laugh, it is I who make love and then feel shame. It is I who lie dying with a rattle in my throat. I am sinner, I am saint, I am the beloved and the betrayed. I have no joys that are not yours, no aches which are not yours. I too call myself I. This is where poetry achieves its universality, cutting down on the differences, the external differences, it makes us realize how we are all connected at the core, how each of us is connected. Of course, if you can recall what Donne said in 17th century, no man is an island. When he says man, of course, human beings. No being is an island. Everyone's death diminishes me, he says, because, why should anyone's death diminish us? Because we are all connected. At the end of the day, there is a reason why all human beings are here, and there is a mysterious thread that binds us. The day we realize, or the day we see that mysterious thread that connects all of us, then our approach towards life is different, becomes different. Then the way we treat people around us becomes different. We become evolved creatures. Such philosophical depth conveyed using the simplest of language in such an extraordinary confessional mode. This is Kamala Das for us, and that's why she becomes important for us. Well, of course, many awards went in search of her, but we should realize that it's not the awards that determine the quality of the poet. Nevertheless, of course, just to make ourselves familiar with the kind of awards she won, these are some of the significant awards. She won the Kerala Sahitya Akademi Award, Asian Poetry Prize, PEN. It's a very prestigious, award. She was shortlisted for Nobel Prize in Literature in 1984, and in 85, the very next year, she won the Central Sahitya Akademi Award, and many other awards. She was even honored with the Asian Poetry Prize, and she was bestowed with an honorary D.Litt degree and all that. And the Kerala government honored her with the Ejutachan Award, the highest literary award that one can get for her contribution to Malayalam literature. These are some of her important works, and considering her contribution to poetry and Indian literature scene, this is how various newspapers, journals, and literary ventures chose to commemorate, paid their tribute when she passed away. So this is Kamala Das for us. So if this class piques your interest in her poetry, or if this has even made you curious about her poetry, then of course the purpose of the class is half done, because we wish to create, our intention is not to give you an exhaustive account of any of these writers when we discuss them. On the other hand, to pique your interest in them, because you know this, right? It's a very short course. In this short course, we may not even be able to do justice to a single writer. Forget, the gamut of writers we have discussed, we may not even be able to do justice to a single writer. The purpose of the class, let me reiterate this, is to pique your interest in all these writers, so that if there is any writer you find some kind of connection with, you can go back and connect yourself with their writing. Having discussed Kamala Das, let us move on to another fellow poet, or in a sense a precursor to Kamala Das's poetry. In fact, many have identified Eunice D'Souza as a kind of forerunner to the kind of confessional poetry that Kamala Das practiced. Another well known fellow writer, and somebody who changed the literary landscape not just of Goa, but of the entire literary scene of India. So, very briefly, of course, she was an English poet, novelist, professor of literature, a literary critic, and editor of some important volumes, and she has also authored a couple of children's works as well. So, this is Eunice D'Souza, another major poet. Of course, there is no point calling these writers as Indian English women poets and all that. They are Indian English poets. Of course, we can even call them do away with Indian English and all that, just poets, but of course we use Indian English as a special signifier for something which we discussed in the beginning of this week. Very quickly, this is her contribution to literature. She has a couple of poetry collections to her credit, beginning with Fix, which is her first poetry collection that came out in 1979, followed by Women in Dutch Painting 1988, Ways of Belonging. A Necklace of Skulls is a remarkable poetry collection that won her several accolades, and Learn from the Almond Leaf, that's her last collection. More than her collections, she is also well known for her edited volumes, because they change the landscape of Indian English poetry in a significant way. Therefore, her contribution is also in this way. Early Indian English poetry, Indian poetry in English, an anthology, Satyanathan Family Album, These My Words, Penguin Book of Indian Poetry, Folk Tales from India, Parda, an anthology, 9 Indian Women Poets, an anthology. They drew the attention of the readers towards fellow poets, and and created interest in their writing as well. And she has also a couple of novels to her credit. This is her writing. So, very naturally, because of her contribution, she was praised by her colleagues Jerry Pinto, Ranjit Hoskote, who is himself an extraordinary poet, a successor of her poetry, you can say. In fact, Ranjit Hoskote's poetry is deeply influenced by the poetry of Eunice D'Souza. So, therefore, he pays a rich tribute to her. And Adil Jusawala, a fellow poet, technically speaking, she too belonged to the Bombay Circle. Initially, she spent much of her time in the company of Adil Jusawala, Arvind Krishna Malhotra, and others. And there are many critics who find a lineage of Nizam Ezekil's poetry, in Eunice D'Souza's poetry. Of course, they were contemporaries. They were. She was influenced by his writing and all that. And again, if you can briefly evoke her the essence of her poetry, she's considered a minimalist with words, you can recall minimalism, using, economy of expression becomes again important here, using the minimum number of words, or not decorative, not embellishing it with here and there, but achieving the extraordinary effect that you wish to achieve, using simplest of the words. So her poetry achieves that kind of feat, So with a tint of stoicism and irony, she put forth through her writing hypocrisies, especially of the Goan Catholic community, the community to which she belonged to. Therefore, her poetry had the capacity, through satire, through irony, she helped expose the hypocrisy of Indian society in general. And see, one of the reasons why poets do this or writers do it is not to lampoon. Of course, it's true that one of the objectives of a satire, a literary satire, is to expose the follies and foibles of a society, but behind that is an extraordinary hope that when exposed, it's like a wound. So unless you expose it to medicine, a wound does not heal on its own. So a literary exposure of a society's hypocrisy has the capacity to heal the society of its own wounds. So her poetry does that job. So when somebody asked to comment on her own poetry, or to briefly describe her own poems, this is how she chose to call. She said, my poems these are lyrical poems with soft, sensuous and passionate lines. That's how she chose to describe her own poetry. Well, in the context of Kamala Das, we discussed how we can consider her as a preeminent confessional poet. That's true for Eunice D'Souza as well. In fact, more than confessional poetry, she inaugurates a kind of what you can call autobiographical poetry. Though of course she went on saying how, don't look for my life in these poems. She went on saying that. That's also the title of her poem. It's a short poem where she says, poems have order, sanity, aesthetic distance from debris, whereas life does not have all that. Life, you can't say there is order in life, there is sanity in life. It's on the edge. Our life is on the edge. So therefore she went on saying that nevertheless, it's true that her poetic works are filled with her autobiographical details, her experiences, her again her frustrations, her hopes and anxieties find a better match in words. Therefore, she can be rightly called autobiographical poet. Yeah. So commenting again on her own first collection of poems, which we have identified as Fix, and she says that it's a slow burning fuse about my own community. She went on writing, this is precisely what writers do, bringing in because they have a first hand knowledge about the society, they use that society as a creative cornucopia, and they are born out of that society, and of course when they are not happy with certain aspects of society, they critique it, and they want that society so that the society can overcome and be a kind of a hospitable place for everybody to live in a harmonious and a peaceful way. As we have already discussed, her contribution is not just to Indian English poetry. Through her poetry collections, she has a significant edited volumes. Through that, she helped her fellow poets find their rightful name and fame in Indian English poetry as well. That's why one of her fellow poets, Jerry Pinto, says that she put together some of the most important anthologies to have been published in the last 20 years. So if you want to get a picture of some major Indian English poets, Indian English women poets especially, if you look at some of her anthologies, you will find a better representation of that particular literary scene. So therefore her contribution is there as well. A Necklace of Skulls is her extraordinary collection. Again, it's not a very voluminous piece, about 70 odd poems divided into 7 odd subsections. Through them she explores human life using an extraordinary skill and language. Again, skulls of course is symptomatic and it acts as synecdoche. We have discussed synecdoche, and they feature her poetic works, especially even some of her older poems that were not published earlier are included in A Necklace of Skulls, and a very important collection by the poet. Before we end discussing Eunice de Souza, here is a poem. Of course, as we said, please think of minimalism. Look what she achieves using the economy of expression. Look what she achieves here. Marriages are made. Of course, there is a popular statement, right? Marriages are made in heaven. She deliberately does not use the next part of that phrase, in heaven. Marriages are made. Now look how marriages are made. Of course, it's a powerful critique of patriarchal society, because if you look for any matrimonial ads, you will see the hypocrisy of patriarchy, how they describe as if brides are available in market. They describe fair, handsome, good looking, somebody docile. So look how she critiques this kind of mindset. Marriages are made. My cousin Elena is to be married. The formalities have been completed. Her family history examined for TB and madness. Her father declared solvent. Her eyes examined for squints. Her teeth for cavities. Her stools for the possible non-Brahmin worm. She is not quite tall enough and not quite full enough. Of course, children will take care of that, so therefore nothing to worry. This is how when a boy's family is about to search for a girl, probably isn't it the mindset in which we work, in which we live even now. Her complexion, it was decided, would compensate, being just about the right shade of rightness to do justice to Francisco Norana Prabhu, good son of Mother Church. Now look at how what is remarkable is the choice of simple words, not even complex structures, but powerful enough to expose the hypocrisy of a patriarchal society in its search for it. That's why this is another one, her well-known poem, Advice to Women, especially here the poetic persona speaks, offers advice to women, in case if they wish not to feel cheated in relationships, what they can do. Keep cats if you want to learn to cope with the otherness of lovers. Here cats become metaphors too. If you want to learn to cope with betrayals in life, you need to keep cats. Why? Because otherness is not always neglect. Cats return to their litter trays when they need to. Similarly, men get back whenever they need women, they get back, but of course not very overt. It's not said overtly. A sensible reader would be able to make the implied meaning here. Don't cuss out of the window at their enemies. The stare of perpetual surprise in those great green eyes will teach you to die alone. So borrowing on the cat's impersonal, it's said, right, that cats don't get attached to people, they get attached to houses. That's a known saying. So borrowing on that, she says, if you want to get used to being aloof in relationships, how women though are a part of a relationship, how they silently bear the brunt of being alone, how they are not considered, their feelings are not considered, and all that. Advice to women. All right, I am sure you have enjoyed listening to these classes. Let us quickly recall what we did. In the earlier class, we began with the poetry of Kamala Das, and we continued that in this class as well. And we discussed Kamala Das poetry as confessional poetry, and then we moved on to Eunice D'Souza and how we can see in her poetry expression of her own self, and we also read some of her interesting poems. Again, if these classes have helped you to develop your interest in poetry in general and poetry of these two remarkable poets, then of course it is a remarkable feat. We will see you in the next class with some more fellow Indian English poets. Thank you. Take care.